3 body parts, 3 locations. 1 unsolved Victorian murder, part of the Thames torso murders that unsettled London in the late 1880s. The Whitehall Mystery's quietly unsettling discoveries suggest someone familiar enough with the city to place each fragment deliberately, weaving the crime into the very heart of London's landscape. Among these sites was the construction ground of the new Scotland Yard, adding a strange irony to the story. Tonight, we will trace these scattered clues across the city, not to shock, but to understand how geography became part of this enduring mystery. As you listen, let the faint mist on the embankment settle around you, and allow your mind to wander back to a time when names and stories could so easily slip away. In the heart of this story is a woman whose identity slipped quietly into obscurity. The few details recovered from her remains offer subtle glimpses into the life she once led. She stood about 5 feet 8 inches tall, her frame described as large and well-nourished. Her skin was fair, her hair dark. Yet, her health was not without its shadows. Her left lung bore the marks of pleurisy, a condition that would have brought discomfort, perhaps even shaped her daily routines. These are the delicate threads investigators tried to weave into a fuller picture, though so much remains missing. Her clothing, too, spoke softly of her background. The brocaded satin dress she wore had been woven in Bradford, England, 3 years before her death. In Victorian times, such fabric was not easily afforded by everyone. The dress, though slightly out of fashion, remained in good condition, hinting that she lived with some degree of comfort. These clues suggest she moved in social circles where appearances mattered and where quality clothing was valued and cared for. Still, no contemporary records indicate she was ever identified. There were other quiet details. Her hands showed no signs of hard labor, no roughness, no calluses. This observation, combined with her healthy build and well-made dress, suggests a life that may have been gentler than that of many women in Victorian London. She was likely accustomed to a world where physical work was not a daily necessity, or at least not one that left its mark on her body. Each of these small facts helps us imagine her, but always at a distance. Yet, the gaps in her story are as telling as the details. Both her head and uterus were missing, and there were no signs she had ever given birth. Whether these absences were part of the violence done to her or something else, the records do not say. Without a face, and with so little to distinguish her, the chances of giving her a name faded quickly. Unlike some victims of the era, whose families stepped forward or whose histories could be pieced together, she remained in the shadows. The reasons for her anonymity are lost. Perhaps she was far from home. Perhaps those who knew her feared the consequences of speaking out. Or perhaps there was simply no one left to notice her absence. The dress's origin in Bradford is just one of many possible hints, but nothing certain. She was estimated to be around 24 years old. Young, with a future that might have stretched ahead, yet old enough to have gathered her own secrets. No jewelry was found, and no distinctive scars or marks beyond those recorded by the coroner. What remains is a handful of physical clues: a dress, a lung condition, a strong build, and the quiet note that her hands had not known hard work. These fragments are all that remain to help us imagine her life before it became a mystery. They whisper of a person, but never quite resolve into a full portrait. And so, her story lingers as a silent echo, unclaimed and unnamed, remembered only through the puzzle left behind. Let's pause for a moment and consider the city itself, for the places where her remains surfaced would soon become as much a part of the mystery as the woman herself. The story of the Whitehall Mystery truly unfolds through the sequence of its discoveries, a careful choreography that drew attention, piece by piece, across central London. It began on September 11th, 1888. A right arm and shoulder were found in the Thames near Pimlico, hidden in a makeshift covering. The Times initially suspected a medical student's prank, but the precision of the clean cut belied any joke. The authorities soon realized this was something far more serious. The arm had been severed with care, showing the work of someone who took time with the task. 3 weeks passed in uneasy silence. Then, on October 2nd, workmen at the construction site for the new Scotland Yard stumbled upon a vault that had only existed for 3 months. The vault had been unlocked and last entered by a worker named Richard Lawrence on September 29th. When opened again, it revealed the torso, no head, no limbs, placed deliberately in the stone-lined foundation of what would soon become the headquarters of Metropolitan Police. The choice of this location, so closely tied to the city's law and order, seemed almost purposeful. It was not a place someone would accidentally discover. The killer appeared to know both the site and its recent changes. On October 17th, the last major piece surfaced. A Spitzbergen dog, brought in by police, helped locate a left leg near the same construction site. The leg had been hidden nearby, waiting to be found. Each discovery came at its own interval, spaced with a patience that suggested a plan. The killer did not rush to scatter the remains, but instead revealed them slowly, as if setting the pace of the investigation. The locations were all within central London, close enough that it's possible the killer moved the remains himself, slipping through the city's unfinished walkways and shadowed embankments. The Victoria Embankment, still under construction, offered cover for someone who understood its hidden corners. These were not random choices. Each site was selected so the remains would eventually be found, but never all at once. There is a sense of deliberate control in the timing and placement. Why leave the torso at Scotland Yard? The vault's recent construction and the timing of access suggest the killer was aware of the site's significance and the window of opportunity. This was not simple disposal. It felt like a message, a demonstration that he could reach deep into the city's most secure spaces. The arm in the Thames remains harder to interpret. Perhaps it was meant to drift, to be found by chance, or to see how quickly authorities would respond. The spacing of discoveries hints at someone who was in no hurry, who wanted each clue to create its own ripple. Speculation followed. Was the killer a worker at the site, or perhaps someone who moved along the river, familiar with both the city's streets and its secret places? What is clear is that the perpetrator understood London's geography well, choosing locations that were both separate and connected, each one drawing the police deeper into the puzzle. As the investigation continued, attention turned to the way the body had been handled. The cuts themselves and the tools used would soon offer the next quiet clues about the person responsible. Let's take a moment to consider what the evidence quietly reveals about the person behind these acts. The right arm, found in the Thames, showed a clean, deliberate cut. A tourniquet, likely hospital style, was used to stem blood flow, indicating familiarity with basic surgical methods. This was not a hurried or improvised act. Each movement seemed planned, carried out by someone who understood the body's structure and how to control the mess that such work could create. Dr. Thomas Bond, the police surgeon, examined the remains and noted the surgical precision. The arm was not hacked apart, but carefully severed at the joint in a way that suggested anatomical knowledge. Even in the late 1880s, when surgical tools were more basic than today, this level of skill would have required some training or experience, perhaps from a hospital or even a military setting. The person responsible did not panic at the sight of blood or bone. Instead, he worked with a steady hand, bringing a quiet, unsettling order to something so violent. The missing uterus added another layer to the puzzle. Its removal, done with care and no unnecessary damage to nearby tissue, suggests a specific intent. Some have wondered if the killer took it to obscure the victim's identity, or perhaps to erase evidence of her personal history. In either case, the act was not frenzied, but measured, focused only on what the killer intended to remove, leaving the rest behind. Deliberate preparation is clear in every detail. The tools required, a sharp blade, a tourniquet, perhaps even cloth for wrapping, point to someone who arrived ready for the task. Nothing about the scene suggests improvisation. The remains were separated cleanly, then placed in locations chosen with care. It's as if each step was mapped out in advance, the work of someone who took time to prepare, both in mind and in method. The victim's body told its own quiet story. There were no defensive wounds, no signs of a struggle. This absence raises gentle questions. Was she unconscious, or did she trust the person who approached her? Did the removal of the uterus serve a personal motive, or was it simply another calculated step in erasing her identity? The police could only speculate, piecing together the facts with what little they had. Even the way the torso was wrapped in cloth, possibly a petticoat, felt intentional. The remains were not abandoned carelessly, but left almost as a parcel, set aside for someone to find. The choice of wrappings and the calmness of the presentation set this case apart, suggesting a kind of ritual or message that lingers just out of reach. As you imagine these careful preparations, let your thoughts drift to the next question. Why choose such a significant place to leave the torso? The answer may hold a clue to the killer's intentions and to the quiet challenge he left for those who would find her. Instead of hiding the torso in a deserted alley or letting it drift away in the river, the killer placed it deep within the cold stone walls of a vault at the New Scotland Yard headquarters. This was not a careless act. The vault, lined with stone and just recently finished, sat at the heart of a building that would soon become the center of police work in London. To choose such a location, the killer needed to know not only the layout, but also the significance of the site, a place that would soon be filled with detectives and constables. The act feels deliberate, as if the killer wanted to leave his own grim signature in location choice. The timing of the deposit is just as telling. The vault had only been completed for a few months. If the killer had waited much longer, the site would have been sealed and bustling with officers. Instead, he walked in during a narrow window, when construction was still active, but the space was vulnerable. The site itself, the future headquarters on Victoria Embankment, was a symbol of modern law enforcement, a fresh start for the Metropolitan Police. Yet, in the midst of this progress, the killer managed to leave a quiet challenge right at their doorstep. Some at the time whispered that this was a direct taunt, an intentional message that the police could not protect even their own house. Theories ranged from a disgruntled worker to someone with insider knowledge, but the careful cuts and medical skill suggested a different background. The killer didn't just want to dispose of the remains. He wanted the police to find them, to feel unsettled in their own future home. There is a sense of a desire to challenge the authorities, perhaps, to show that order could be disrupted in the very place meant to uphold it. This method of staging the crime, choosing a location so charged with meaning, stands out. It wasn't simply about hiding evidence. It was about leaving a mark, a reminder that someone had slipped past the city's growing sense of security. The torso, carefully wrapped and placed, became a silent message that echoed through the halls long after the discovery. Carrying a torso through London would not have been easy. The weight, the risk of being seen. These details point to planning and familiarity. Construction sites saw many deliveries, and a bundled shape could blend in with the daily traffic of crates and materials. The killer's knowledge of the site and its routines suggests he watched and waited for the right moment, acting with patience rather than panic. Despite the resources and attention focused on the case, the police never found the person responsible. The clues, a dress from Bradford, surgical skill, and the calm precision of the act were not enough. The torso's placement at Scotland Yard ensured that the case would remain in the minds of those who walked its halls, a quiet reminder of a challenge left unanswered. As autumn deepened in 1888, London's fears grew. Another killer haunted the city's streets, and soon comparisons would be drawn between these two mysteries. The police insisted these cases were separate, but the timing and the atmosphere of dread made the lines between them feel blurred. As the autumn of 1888 settled over London, another shadow moved quietly beside the terror in Whitechapel. The city was already uneasy, but the discoveries at Whitehall brought a new, unsettling question. Was there a second predator at work, hidden just beyond the Ripper's reach? Speculation grew quickly. The press drew parallels between the two mysteries, often focusing on the fact that both victims were women and both crimes unsettled the city. But beneath the surface, the differences stood out. The wounds told separate stories. The Ripper's attacks were marked by frenzied, brutal slashes, especially to the abdomen. In contrast, the Whitehall victim's body bore clean, careful cuts, dismemberment performed with a steady hand, no genital mutilation, and a tourniquet used on the arm. The killer here worked with control, not chaos. Police investigators paid close attention to these details. The Whitehall victim's uterus was removed with precision, unlike the violent mutilation seen in Whitechapel. The Whitehall remains appeared weeks apart, each piece surfacing after careful placement, while the Ripper's killings happened in quick succession, each body found almost immediately. The patience and planning in Whitehall's case set it apart from the Ripper's swift brutality. Even the way the crimes were staged felt different. The Ripper left his victims in the open, on public streets, where they would be discovered within moments. The Whitehall killer hid each part, spacing out the discoveries, and chose locations that seemed to carry a message, none more so than the vault at Scotland Yard. The approach was deliberate, almost methodical, as if the killer wanted to control not just the act itself, but also the way the city would discover and react to it. The backgrounds of the victims added another quiet distinction. The woman at Whitehall wore a brocaded dress, suggesting a different background from the impoverished women targeted in Whitechapel. She may have moved in circles where comfort and appearance were important, while the Ripper's victims were known for their struggles, and hardship. This difference, though subtle, shaped how investigators saw the two cases. Despite the police's efforts to explain these differences, public fear lingered. Newspapers continued to blur the lines, and the lack of answers kept anxiety high. Investigators could only rely on observation and deduction, their tools limited by the era. Yet, the patterns, different wounds, different victims, different rhythms, hinted at separate stories unfolding in the same city. The Whitehall Mystery left behind more than just questions about the killer's identity. It whispered of another presence, moving in the city's darker corners, a phantom whose methods and motives were not quite the same as the Ripper's. Could London have borne two unseen terrors that autumn? Let's pause here and turn our attention to the one clue that seemed to carry a story all its own. The brocaded satin dress, woven years before, might hold the quietest answers in this mystery. Among all the fragments left behind, the dress stands quietly as the most personal trace of the woman at the heart of the Whitehall Mystery. Brocaded satin, woven in Bradford, it was made about 3 years before her death. In Victorian England, such fabric was not an everyday purchase. It suggested someone who cared about appearance, who lived or aspired to a world where clothing mattered. The dress was not new, but it was not worn out either. Its careful upkeep spoke of someone who valued her belongings and took time to maintain them. Bradford, 200 miles to the north, was a hub of textile production in the 1880s. Its mills sent fine fabrics across Britain. Detectives traced the pattern of the dress back to this busy city, but no records could identify its sale. The city's booming industry produced countless garments, and the supply chain stretched from local shops to bustling London markets. Even so, the trail quickly faded. Retail records from the era were inconsistent, and most shops, especially smaller ones, kept only basic ledgers. The dress could have been bought directly in Bradford, or it might have traveled south, sold in London, or passed from hand to hand. The second-hand trade was common, and garments often changed owners quietly, leaving no trace for investigators to follow. This simple fact made it nearly impossible to connect the dress to a single woman, even with its distinctive quality. The age of the dress added another layer to the puzzle. In Victorian times, clothing was made to last. A high-quality fabric like satin could be worn for years, especially by someone who could not afford to refresh her wardrobe with the latest fashions. The pattern of the dress was slightly out of date by 1888, with subtle differences in sleeve or trim from newer styles. This detail suggested a woman who prioritized quality and durability, or perhaps someone whose circumstances required her to make things last. She was not chasing every trend, but she was not neglecting her appearance either. Her hands, noted by investigators as free from calluses or signs of hard work, matched the story told by her dress. She was not living a life of daily manual labor. The combination of well-cared-for clothing and unmarked hands painted a picture of a woman who moved through a world where appearances counted, even if her exact place in that world remains hidden. Despite the dress's distinctive fabric and careful maintenance, no shopkeeper or acquaintance came forward to claim recognition. No laundry mark or monogram offered a clue. The garment, for all its detail, became a dead end. In a city as crowded as London, even such a personal belonging could vanish into the background, its story left unfinished. There is a quiet sadness in how completely her identity slipped away. The killer took her name, her face, and any objects that might have linked her to a home or family. Only the dress remained, and even that, with all its clues, led nowhere. It is a reminder of how easily a life can become a mystery, how even the most carefully preserved evidence can fail to reveal the truth. As you picture the quiet folds of that brocaded satin, consider the weight of what remains unsolved. The Whitehall Mystery endures not just for its unanswered questions, but for the silence that surrounds them, a silence that, even now, refuses to fade. To understand why the Whitehall Mystery endures, let's look at what sets it apart from other unsolved cases. There's a quiet irony at its heart. The dismembered torso was discovered in the foundation vault of what would become New Scotland Yard. The very building meant to symbolize justice and order was built atop a crime that the authorities never solved. It began and remained beneath the very vault of law and order. That detail lingers, giving the story a lasting presence in the city's memory. The timing also matters. The Whitehall Mystery unfolded during the same tense months as the Jack the Ripper murders. People naturally compared the two, but the differences are striking. Where the Ripper's violence was chaotic and public, the Whitehall killer worked with calm precision, hiding evidence in places meant to be found only by those who looked closely. That contrast, chaos versus careful planning, gives this case its own distinct chill. Part of the case's hold on us is what we don't know. There is no name for the victim, no clear motive, no hint of whether the killer was ever caught for another crime. Most mysteries offer at least one answer. This one offers none. That emptiness invites quiet speculation, letting the mind drift through possibilities. Even today, modern enthusiasts still play a Whitehall mystery game, tracing the old map of London and searching for patterns that remain just out of reach. The fascination has not faded. The killer's methods also draw attention. He didn't simply discard the remains, he arranged them, choosing the vault at Scotland Yard for a reason, spacing out the discoveries with intention. Each clue seemed placed to be found, but only on his terms. That kind of planning is rare. Most historical crimes show a moment of panic or a careless mistake. Here, everything was measured, as if the killer understood how to keep the puzzle just out of reach. There is also the matter of the victim, a woman whose life is glimpsed only through a dress from Bradford and hands that never saw hard labor. The details hint at a world beyond London's slums, but nothing more. Other Victorian victims were remembered by friends or family, but she remains a shadow, her story lost, except for the fragments left behind. It feels as if the killer wanted her story to vanish, even as he ensured the crime itself would be remembered. What keeps the Whitehall Mystery alive is this balance of clues and emptiness. The dress suggests comfort, but not enough to find her name. The surgical skill points to training, but no clear suspect emerges. The locations were chosen with care, yet their meaning stays just out of reach. The more you look, the more the answers slip away. Let these unanswered threads lull you into pondering mysteries that rest unsolved. As we continue to wander through the foggy streets of 1888 London, the Whitehall Mystery invites us to listen, to wonder, and to accept that some stories will always remain just beyond our grasp. Tonight, we've quietly traced the Whitehall Mystery through London's mist and memory. A woman with no name, a vanished killer, and a crime scene beneath the future Scotland Yard. This story lingers because it refuses to settle into the past. While Jack the Ripper haunted headlines, This case unfolded in silence, marked by deliberate clues and questions left behind. The surgical precision of the cuts and the vault at Scotland Yard each hint at a deeper story we'll never fully know. Some mysteries rest in silence, inviting endless wonder. If this quiet mystery stirred your thoughts tonight, consider subscribing for more soothing stories before you sleep. As the hush of a London night settles around you, let your mind drift toward peaceful rest.